All alone, whether you like it or not, alone will be something you'll be quite a lot. And when you're alone, there's a very good chance you'll meet some things that'll scare you right out of your pants. There are some down the road between hither and yon that can scare you so much you won't want to go on. This is an excerpt from Dr. Seuss's book, Oh, the Places You'll Go. I remember I read this book to my daughter when she was a baby, and I remember thinking that there is so much truth in that. Loneliness is something that we will all encounter at some point in our lives. Sometimes the loneliness is something we seek out ourselves, and sometimes the loneliness is something that kind of just happens to us. Either way, we will end up feeling lonely at some point in our lives. Being able to see the good things that can come out of loneliness is helpful, because sometimes things happen to us and we can't always see the path out of it or see why it's happening in our lives, and kind of see the silver lining as to what we can do to kind of propel ourselves forward in our lives. Sometimes this quiet contemplation isn't necessarily a bad thing. This period of silence and being on our own can allow us to see what it is that we want in our lives and kind of focus our efforts a little bit better. Loneliness is something I encountered a lot when becoming a new mother for the first time, and it's something I've encountered periodically since then. Sometimes the loneliness was more self-induced, and it was necessary because things were changing in my life at the time. And I found that I blocked myself off from relationships for a period of time because I was going through some things myself, and being able to do that alone and on my own was very helpful. Sometimes we don't want the influences of those around us, and sometimes certain circumstances and events that people are in our lives aren't very helpful for us. Take, for example, if you're trying to avoid alcohol because it's been very toxic in your life, and your friendships in the past have been more centralized towards the whole alcohol culture. It might be hard for you to be around those types of people at a certain period of time when you're trying to stay away from that. There's many different ways that certain things can be hard for us to work through with relationships, and sometimes relationships are not a permanent fixture in our lives. Sometimes they're temporary, but that doesn't diminish the importance that those relationships once held in our lives. These relationships were very meaningful at one point, and there was a lot of love shared and care, and a lot of inner thoughts and feelings that were expressed. There were a lot of experiences shared, and there was a lot of care put into these relationships. And the fact that they are temporary does not diminish their importance to us at that certain period in our lives. Non-attachment is the idea of letting these things ebb and flow in our lives. All relationships have an ebb and flow. Sometimes they're there for only a short period of time, and sometimes they're there for a longer period of time. Not only that, but the relationship itself might have ebbs and flows. There'll be times where you're hanging out with a specific person a lot more, and then maybe less so because things are kind of changing in your life. And I think that goes with romantic relationships as well as friendships. I think that the idea of non-attachment is more so allowing these things to naturally change over time, and to not try to force or hold on to things and keep them exactly where they're at just because it was good at one point in time. There's been many relationships in my life that I had to let go of that were incredible and amazing, and I really enjoyed at a period in my life. And there were times where I had to let those things go because it wasn't necessarily where I wanted to see myself in the future, or it wasn't where I was going. The fact is that things are going to change whether we like it or not, and forcing a particular outcome on a certain situation or a certain relationship isn't all that helpful, because this change is inevitable, and we are either going to move with it or we're going to choose to move against it. And sometimes that means that we will be a little bit lonely in our lives. And I don't think that being lonely is necessarily a bad thing. I think that there's a bit of a silver lining that's there that we can honor or respect. The fact that being alone allows you to reflect and to see what's working in your life and what maybe needs to change. It allows you to redirect your life if things aren't going the way that you want them to, or the way that you see yourself in the future. I think if we honor this ebb and flow, we're more likely to find a lot more peace in our lives, because we're not trying to force anything, just remain the same or to change even. The idea of non-attachment is seeing a particular vision but not forcing something that isn't working, and allowing things to change. Sometimes our loneliness is more self-induced, and we haven't had the nerve to actually put ourselves out there and to try to find new connections. And I think that sometimes we need to try to push ourselves out of our comfort zone and really put ourselves out there, because sometimes there can be a lot of really amazing connections that we aren't seeing because we're not putting ourselves out into the world and we're not choosing to be vulnerable. Vulnerability is a very important aspect of building relationships and maintaining relationships. Vulnerability is something that I've really struggled with because I don't like to be vulnerable in front of people. However, the reason why I choose to have a smaller friend group is because I can be vulnerable with a particular amount of people, and it's usually not a large number. I can only handle a few friends at a time. I think I only have like 4 or 5 really close friends, and some of them I don't really see all that often, and that's okay because we're all, like I said, moving through our own things in life. We're all going through our own changes and growing in our own ways, and sometimes our lives get very busy, and I think that we need to be aware of the fact that that's something that's going to happen in our lives. People are going to be working on their own lives and going through their own things. But if you are feeling lonely, there's always ways that you can push yourself out of your boundaries. There's many different ways for us to meet people who are like-minded or into the same things as us as well. I think that the hardest thing is transitioning out of the whole high school era, when you see a lot of people taking certain paths. There's some people that take really productive and helpful paths in their life, and there's some people that take really destructive paths, and it can be hard for us to let these things go, because sometimes I know that in my high school era, I kind of hoped for lifelong relationships. I always wanted lifelong relationships, and it didn't take until later on in adulthood that I could honor and respect the idea of temporary relationships, and to see the importance of these things, how they held so much value and importance at one point in time in my life, and that I can still love and cherish this person from afar, and it's okay to let these things go. The whole non-attachment theory has been extremely helpful for me. I think sometimes we have to be able to reframe the thing that's happening in our lives, and with loneliness, I think it's important to be able to reframe that as well, because the loneliness that we're experiencing can be the quiet before the storm, or the quiet before something happens in our life, the big change. And I think that recuperating and self-love and self-care and spending time to contemplate redirection in our lives can be very helpful. When I'm going through a lonely period in my life, I no longer wish for something different. I try to sit in the silence, and I'm okay with the fact that I'm feeling lonely, because that's only an indication that a change is coming.